The first time Jim Sullivan hears the mound breathe, he thinks it's the wind combing the speargrass. The paddock lies east of the homestead, a forgotten strip where lantana and prickly acacia wrestle for the sun. Dawn burns thin and orange across the Queensland sky, and the giant termite mound stands like a petrified wave, 12 feet of baked clay stitched with hairline cracks. Jim idles the tractor and listens. There it is again. A low tremor, a hush that moves through the shell like something alive demanding quiet. He laughs at himself and taps the steering wheel. Ghosts don't hold their breath. He kills the engine. Silence hammers the world flat. Magpies pause mid-croon. The cattle hold their breath. Even the dry leaves think twice before rattling. Jim slides off the seat and sets his boots into the dust. The air carries that warm, faintly sweet smell of brittle grass and old earth, with a sharper edge of iron, rainless and metallic. He palms the mound. The surface is hot already, rough as coral, pocked with tiny vents. A grain of clay flakes beneath his thumb and breaks like brown sugar. "Big fella," he says to nobody. To his father, maybe, or to the ghosts of the men who once made this place a map of fences and work. He knocks on the side. A hollow clunk answers, deeper than it should be. Not just chambers and tunnels. Space. Yesterday, pest control warned him. The old mounds hide all sorts. Sinkholes, feral nests, forgotten wells. "Don't trust the ground," the woman on the phone said. "Termites love stability. They build on what doesn't move." Jim looked at his east paddock and saw hectares of nothing he can turn into something. Barley maybe, or lucerne if the water cooperates. He told himself he'd start with the biggest obstacle. Start clean, start brave. He circles the tower. Dragonflies stitch in light. A crow scolds from an ironbark. Far off, a bore pump coughs awake. Jim feels the tug in his chest that he never names. Not panic, not hope. The shape of a decision he has outrun for years. He climbs back onto the tractor. The loader's bucket lifts with a sigh. A stoic machine exhale. He lowers his hat brim and sets the teeth against the mound. Clay screams when steel bites. The first gouge shears off in slabs thudding to the ground, breaking into insect palaces, ribs and galleries, arcs of architecture too precise to be accidental. Termites stream for a moment, 1,000 pale commas rearranging their sentence, then vanish into deeper punctuation. Jim leans. A second bite. A third. He works in breaths. Push. Lift. Reverse. Push. Lift. Reverse. The machine shudders, as if the mound resists with its own stubbornness. Time becomes one amber loop. Sweat runs hot into his eyes. Dust cakes his teeth. The scent of disturbed earth rises. Wet copper and bitter mold, like turning over pages in a sealed trunk. When he pauses to swipe his forearm across his face, he hears it, under the engine, behind the noise. The hollow tone again, louder now, a resonance that doesn't belong to insects or dirt. He moves the bucket a little lower. The mound slumps, a cathedral tired of pretending to stand. As it lists, Jim has the prickling certainty that he is undoing someone else's decision, that this structure's loyalty lies not with termites or grass, but with time. He hesitates. Then he remembers the overdue feed bill, the sagging gutters, the way the bank officer smiled like a doctor who knows the test results. He digs. The final cut lands with a sound that is not dirt. A thunk, sharp and separate. The mound groans and folds inward, a breaking wave collapsing into its own foam. Clay erupts in a powdery cloud. When it settles, the world looks rearranged. Jim parks, boots crunching across shards. Where the heart of the mound stood, a shallow pit yawns. He steps down into it, kneels, and brushes aside gritty crust. His knuckles meet metal, cold, unmistakable metal. Not a pipe, not a rock. Flat, waiting. He scrapes with his nails until a rusted edge appears, a line like the seam of a lid. Jim's breath catches. The mound wasn't breathing. Something beneath it was. Jim stands on the veranda afterward with a mug that smells like burnt dust and instant coffee. The homestead squats low against the heat, corrugated roof ticking as the sun climbs. Out past the water tanks, the east paddock waits, a rough quilt of native grass and scarred tracks where the tractor chewed a path at dawn. He watches the wedge-tailed eagles skate thermals, watches the light come clean and unforgiving. Today he finally takes that paddock back. He decides it like a pledge whispered to the boards beneath his boots. Bills crowd the kitchen table in thin, bright envelopes. Feed, vet, diesel, 2 months behind on the loan. In the drawer by the sink is a folded note in his father's blocky hand. East block is yours to figure. Solid clay cap. Don't trust the ground. The old man wrote that in '97 and never did figure it. A heart attack carried him into the red dirt before he passed the baton properly. Jim keeps the note because the ink still carries the weight of a voice he misses. The mound has been a landmark since he was a kid, one of a dozen spires, the height of fear, some toppled by cattle, some split by storms. This one's stubborn as a monument. He's tried not to see it. You get used to detouring around the hard things. A fence line that ends short, a pump that rattles wrong, a conversation you leave for after harvest. But the season is late and stingy, and the bank's patience has an expiry he can almost taste. He needs arable land. He needs the east paddock. He cleans the loader's bucket with a crowbar, knocks old clay into a brown drift that the wind smears away. He checks the tire pressure with his thumb, checks the hydraulic fluid, checks the way his hands shake when he thinks about failure. He thinks of his father's father, Harry Sullivan, who cut fence posts by moonlight and slept on gunny sacks, who never wasted a sunrise. There is a photograph inside, Harry holding a hurricane lamp, the shadow of a shed behind him, an expression that says, quietly, "Keep going." "Righto," Jim tells the tractor. "Let's earn our keep." The machine answers with that farmyard patience, that creamy mechanical calm. He drives east through the gate, magpies tossing themselves skyward ahead of him like thrown hats. Termite mounds rise and tilt in the paddock, ancient sculptures with their own logic, their own stubborn grammar. The big one throws a blunt shadow as long as a truck. He parks. He listens. A breeze roams the grass, hot already, tasting faintly of salt from a dry creek bed. On camera, this is where you'd cut to a close-up of his hand touching the clay, and then to his eyes and then to the horizon, a rhythm of decisions playing quietly under the engine's idle. If you're watching this now, if your tea is cooling on your table in Rio or Brisbane or a kitchen like his somewhere out near Roma, tell us where you're from. Say what this kind of work looks like where you are. And if you're new here, hit subscribe so you catch the next story when it shows up like a thunderhead on a broad sky. Jim is not a romantic about dirt. He respects it like you respect a bull. It can throw you without meaning to. The ground here is cracking from lack of rain, pattering with ants baked to the color of cinnamon toast. He knows that termites don't just build anywhere. They choose sites that hold steady through monsoon tantrums and drought sulks, places the wind and cattle and time ignore. If there's danger under a mound, it's because the earth already agreed to keep a secret. He thinks about secrets. This place has them. The old airstrip to the west, straight as a ruler and half swallowed by spinifex. The marked tree where someone once carved initials in the year 1942. The stories about lights moving low and silent over the ridge when the war turned oceans into doors. His mother used to tell him that the land remembers what people forget. He didn't understand until the first time he heard silence move across a paddock like weather. He climbs down to tighten the loader's coupling and finds a bird skull in the dust, pearl white, so light it could be breath. He pockets it and stands, stretching his back. He could call someone to help, Jake from up the road with the excavator, or Tess at pest control. But pride is a double knot, and hiring machinery costs money he needs for seed and molasses. The mound looks tall until you drive into it. Then it looks inevitable. He rolls forward. The bucket noses into clay. The tractor's note drops, steady and willing. Pieces fall. The air fills with the chalky taste of Galloway earth. Minutes stack. When he pauses, his chest ticks like a cooling motor. He steps down, boots sinking a hair into the soft patch where dust has settled, and listens again to that hollow inside the mound. Not wind, not water. Something like a room humming with the memory of someone breathing. He pictures Harry in the photograph again, the hurricane lamp casting a ragged circle, perhaps out near this very spot. He pictures Harry stashing cash in biscuit tins, hiding bottles under the washhouse steps, doing the things that men do when the world tilts and they need to feel the edge of their own control. The year 1942 sleeps under everything here, like a second soil. Japanese submarines in the Coral Sea, blackouts in Brisbane, men digging slit trenches that the grass has since forgiven. Start clean, Jim says. He says it like a prayer and a plan. He lifts the bucket for another bite, then sets it back down and kills the engine. He stands in the sudden brightness of silence and speaks to the camera he doesn't own. If this was a show, he says, this is where you'd be shouting at me to stop or to go. I know. I feel it too. He smiles. Half. Stick around. This gets weird. He climbs up, turns the key, and aims the teeth for the heart of the mound. Before we dive in, do one thing for this channel. Subscribe, leave a comment with your town, and share this with someone who knows the smell of hot dust after rain. Your stories help us find ours. And the next gate to open. The second pass knocks loose a slab big as a mattress. It slides, shatters, and a whole flank of the mound subsides with a grinding sigh. The earth fluffs where it falls, a drift of ochre dust that tastes like brick. Jim eases the bucket lower, coaxing not forcing, feeling for that break between compacted clay and whatever lies beneath. The tractor chatters over the rough ground. Insects boil for a heartbeat, then pour back into the savage geometry of their city, remapping, relentless. He finds the pitch again, that tone with edges. He feathers the throttle and teases at the weak seam mid-height. Clay ribs buckle inward. He sees tunnels in cross-section, arched like a cathedral nave, polished by thousands of tiny bodies. He thinks of lungs, of a whale skeleton in a museum, air wrenching in its cage. He doesn't romanticize termites, but he respects engineers who work blind. The bucket teeth kiss something that rings. He stops. The sound hangs, tinny, certain. He backs away, parks, shuts down. Heat keeps singing in the engine metal, a quicksilver ticking. In the sudden stillness, the air presses warm hands over his ears. Jim climbs down with a crowbar and a shovel and walks into the shadow of the ruin. Up close, the mound's interior looks like a burned honeycomb. The smell shifts darker. Mildew, cold iron, a fossil of damp that should not belong to morning. He tests the dust with his heel. The ground shears a little, then holds. He clears loose crust away with the shovel, the blade rasping on grit. A depression appears, shallow but deliberate, the kind of bowl that forms when weight has sat a long time. The crowbar skates over hard clay, then pings. He scrapes with the flat end and reveals a plane of metal the color of dried blood, stippled with rust blooms. A curve, then a straight, then the ghost of a hinge buried like a buried thought. He laughs once, a low, unbelieving exhale that doesn't make it to his throat. He looks around reflexively, as if witnesses might rise out of the grass. The paddock remains the paddock. Sky, light, distance. Jim squats and brushes with his fingers. The metal is cold despite the sun, seeping a cellar chill. He pictures water, a tank, a culvert. He pictures an old drum left by a station hand in the 70s, one of those problems that grows a myth. But the hinge says door. He works a trench around the edges with the shovel, careful not to let the lip collapse into the void his mind is drawing. Clay clods are heavy and close like lifting wet pages. Sweat dries as fast as it forms. Its salt burns the corners of his eyes. He whispers without deciding to. "What did you build on, you little bastards?" Not angry. Curious. Grateful even to have been told where to look. The shovel rides up on a bolt head. He switches to the crowbar and pries, feeling for the seam. When he finds it, a dark line opens, tight as a stitched wound. He runs the bar along that line and hears small, decisive clicks as old clay scabs surrender. At last the outline shows. A rectangle maybe 3 by 3, the steel thick, the hinge sunken. He cleans the hinge with the flat of his hand and feels the embossed map of old numbers under rust. 19, 4, 2. The year lands with a thud. It vibrates the floor of his chest. 1942, his grandfather's year. The air seems to dim, like a cloud crossing the sun. Jim rocks back on his heels and sits in the dust. He sees Harry again in that photograph in the hurricane lamp. He sees the marked tree. He hears his mother's voice the way she told war stories, soft, as if the dark held on to sound differently then. He stands. He plants the crowbar under the lip and leans. Nothing. He leans again, digging his boots for leverage, grunting, boot soles grinding on grit. The lid doesn't budge. He cleans more clay from the edges, working in cycles. Scrape, breathe, scrape, until he's carved a trench wide enough to admit both hands in an argument. He tightens a length of baling wire to the handle he uncovers, doubles it, ties the other end to the loader's hitch and climbs to the seat. It is not the kind of thing you do quickly. He puts the tractor in low and lets it idle forward until the wire sings. The lid lifts a hair, then relents, then sticks. He reverses, reties, worries the angle. Ants swarm his boots in a crescendo of annoyance. He steps aside and slaps at his socks and laughs at the madness of it. Third try, the hinge groans. The sound is animal and ancient, a bellow from a throat that hasn't opened in decades. The lid yawns. then lays back, the hinge protesting in peals and squeals until stillness reclaims its authority. A breath rises. Not air, exactly. Temperature. The cool of underground. The smell spirals up. Stale oil, damp canvas, old paper, a curl of something medicinal. Jim kills the tractor so he can hear time. He kneels at the rim. Below, a ladder vanishes into a chamber that isn't black so much as brown-green, the color of subtracting light. Silt glitters in the shaft like dust in a church. He listens for a snake's whisper, for rat chatter, for any movement that has forgotten people. Nothing. He peels off his gloves and touches the rung. Cold. Secure. He tests his weight and the wood answers. Dry but patient. He goes back to the ute for a torch and a length of rope because even alone you pretend someone is watching, and you want them to think you're careful. He ties off to the hitch, secures it around his waist, clicks the torch alive and lowers his boots into the absence he has made. The latter complains in vowels. He counts rungs because the body likes numbers when the brain grows wild. 7, 8, 9. The air is 20 summers ago. Green, wet, close. He drops the torch's beam into the room and sees edges resolve. Corrugated walls, a workbench, a pair of trunks, a bicycle wheel leaning against a crate. On the bench, a rusted hurricane lamp's twin to the one in the photo. At the bottom, he stands still and lets the place recognize him. The room is small enough to know in one glance, but dense enough to reveal itself only by layers. Cobweb lace. A calendar page pinned and curled, the month-long bleached. Bundles wrapped in oilcloth stacked in a married order, a logic of use only the original hands could decode. He moves the beam slowly. Tins, a tin cup, a field radio's skeleton, a biscuit tin labeled in pencil sugar and heavy with something that isn't. He smells the canvas again, and the paper, and under it all the penny's tang of old iron. The torch catches on a long rectangle bolted to the wall, and he realizes the room continues beyond, cut by a second door that sits a little ajar. He reaches for it. His knuckles touch the wood, and a scrap of silence falls away like a loose tile. In the corner, something suggests itself. A shape. The beam steadies. It is exactly what he thinks and nothing like he expects. A steel strongbox with a padlock turned to dust in its sleep. Now, he tests the strongbox with the crowbar. The padlock crumbles between his fingers like old bread. Inside, a folded oilcloth exhales a perfume of machine oil and Sundays. He peels it back and finds papers, ration books, a birth certificate, a photograph of Harry beside a truck with ARP stenciled on the hood, a handwritten inventory, the ink bled but legible, rides on top like a map, corrugated container, East Paddock, contents, tools, stores, family. He speaks into the room's hush without meaning to. He drags the torch to the second door. It sticks at first, then swings with the petulance of warped timber. The room widens into a second chamber, taller by a head, lined with corrugations that curve like ribs. A workbench runs the length of one wall, and above it neat hooks hold objects wrapped like loaves. He unties the first bundle. Silver winks through yellowed paper, teacups with delicate handles, their bellies softly dented by time, a spout that pours a memory of Sunday light. The second bundle answers with a heavier voice, a velvet-lined case that sighs when he opens it, revealing coins stamped with young Victoria's profile and leaves so crisp they look freshly pressed. He turns one in his palm. It feels minted, not just of gold, but of saved afternoons and quiet plans. He finds the rifles last. Two long shadows leaned with care in the corner, their stalks oiled and sleeping. He does not touch the triggers. He remembers the marked tree again, and Harry's lamp, and his father's note. Don't trust the ground. He looks at the ladder and feels, for the first time since the lid yielded, a thin wire of fear sing through him. This is a bunker. This is a place built when the world was rehearsing bad outcomes. Conflicts arrive as couples, fear and need, memory and law. He thinks of legality. The land is his. The items by rights are his too, unless someone buried them with a different intention, unless the government has opinions about wartime stashes. He thinks of safety. The ladder has held 60 years of waiting. It could decide it has done enough. He thinks of witnesses. The room is a story, and stories are hungriest before anyone else knows them. He climbs the ladder to the hatch and tastes the hot day as he pulls himself into it. He sits on the edge and calls Tess Morgan at Pest Control because competence is a compass. and because he told himself he would. Her voice carries the burr of someone who has driven more dirt roads than bitumen. He explains the mound, the lid, the ladder, the smell. Tess listens like a surveyor. "You're not the first bloke to find someone's apocalypse," she says. "You alone there?" He admits it. "All right, I'm 10 minutes out from a property near you. I can swing by. Don't go, hero." He also calls Dr. Amelia Hart at the local historical society because his mother would have, and because the year carved into the hinge keeps repeating like a song stuck in a truck radio. Amelia answers on the third ring. When he says 1942, her breath makes a small shape. Where exactly? He gives her the rough run of it. "Don't touch too much," she says, then apologizes because the words sound like scolding. "If it's what I think, Queensland had private civil defense caches. Families made bunkers. Fear hardens into storage. Waiting reintroduces heat. Flies find him and test the salt at his neck. He drinks from the thermos. The tractor ticks itself quiet. He looks at the lid propped at an angle like an eyelid, unsure about waking fully. In a minute, the itch to be busy beats patience. He climbs back down with a plan. Inventory without moving what matters. Eyes before hands. He sets the torch on the bench, the beam domed in a drinking glass to spread the light. He opens a tin marked buttons and finds bullets. He sets it down with 2 hands. He opens a box marked books and finds ledgers, columns of careful figures, then an envelope of letters addressed to H. Sullivan in a hand so tidy it aches. He reads one sentence without meaning to. "We are fine, love. The boys are chopping wood and the lemon tree flowers already." He stops. He sits. He presses the paper to the bench as if it might leap back to where it belongs. Footsteps shuffle overhead. Tess calls down, "You alive?" He answers, and in a moment her boots appear. Then her grin, then she is beside him, one hand on the ladder, the other keeping her hat on as if subterranean wind could snatch it. She whistles low. "Well, bugger me," she says with real reverence. "Termites built on steel. Happens sometimes. Safer, warmer, better drainage." She taps the corrugation. "Smart architects, lousy neighbors." Amelia arrives with the pastor and Grant Bishop from the real estate office because news travels not by network, but by niece. Jim considers bristling, then lets relief make room. Permission loves witnesses. Amelia descends patent leather careful, a notebook already open, her pen armed. She breathes what the room breathes and smiles with her eyes. "Containerized," she says, delighted. Some families repurposed rail containers. They dragged them with trucks or teams, cut ladders, used termite hills as camouflage when they could. They work. Tess tests air with a little meter, frowns, then nods. "Low oxygen but safe if we open the lid fully." Jim and Grant lever the lid until daylight pours like a pale flood. Amelia photographs, labels, narrates into her phone. Jim lifts, holds, steadies. Pastor Tom, whose collar is 1 part cloth and 1 part presence, stands quiet with the letters and hums tunelessly, and Jim does not mind. Together they unroll oilcloths and exhale names: sugar, ammunition, lamp oil, preserves long since shadow, flour too hopeful to taste, and in their midst, the good things meant to survive memory. Conflicts thin as work finds its rhythm. Need circles back as lists. Fix the roof, pay diesel, buy seed, but discovery grows like a second heart. In the last trunk they open, a cedar chest with brass corners gone green. Amelia gasps and steps back so quickly she knocks a tin that tink-tinks to the floor and rolls in a slow crescent. Inside the chest, nested in tissue, sit heirlooms that change the weight of the air. A gleaming tea service, silver chased with fern motifs, a handful of gold sovereigns, a literate shine that makes people speak softer. Amelia looks at Jim the way someone looks at news. "Do you see?" she says softly. And he does. Not greed, continuity, choice hardening into care. Harry had buried a version of tomorrow and trusted the termites to build a church over it. Jim touches the teapot's lip with a knuckle, as if greeting a stranger he already loves. Tess breaks the rising hush before it ferments into something maudlin. "Let's get you above ground, Sullivan," she says. "We'll ring the constabulary, the insurance, the museum people, and before any of that, a cuppa. This is your day, mate, but no one gets crushed by a memory on my watch." Jim laughs, surprised by the clean sound of it. He climbs, emerging into a sun that has shifted 1 fist toward afternoon, skin prickling as the breeze rakes sweat to attention. On the grass, Amelia balances pieces on a blanket for a quick photograph. a catalog of proof. The coins wink in the light like fluent arguments. The kettle makes a tired cluck on the camp stove. Tess deals mugs with the efficiency of a medic. To the east paddock, she says. To stubborn ground and the people who keep asking it questions. They drink. They let the day breathe around them. Jim looks at the mound's ruin and feels the relief of seeing a task undone because it was a door instead of a wall. Someone laughs. Someone wipes a cheek. The afternoon steadies around a fact weighty. Jim breathes and lets the paddock return to a paddock, except now it holds a room with his name on the door. By mid-afternoon, the shade of the lid makes a chapel. Tess strings hazard tape around the hole because she knows people and gravity. Amelia kneels with the letters like relics and asks Jim if he wants to read aloud or if he'd rather have her do it. The paper makes a careful rip when she frees it from the envelope. She smooths it, and the room arranges itself. Tess still. Pasture Tom propped on the last rung. Grant checking the ladder's bolts with the concentration of a man who likes jobs both simple and necessary. Amelia reads. Harry writes about unrolling wire, about petrol chits and how the boys sleep in shifts, about burying a container because the radio said it was prudent to prepare for the kind of visit you can't refuse. Then there's a paragraph in a different ink. If this passes to you, to ours, use it without shame. War makes hoarders of the honest. I mean to leave something steady where the wind can't touch it. If there's no war, then let it be an anchor. Don't trust the ground. The top looks solid and the underbit's a trick. She looks up at Jim and smiles like a key turning. Pasture Tom clears his throat as if making room for gratitude without letting it drown the air. Tess photographs hallmarks with her phone and texts a mate who knows silver. Grant rings the local constable who says bring him receipts and he'll bring a handshake. Over the next hour, the bunker becomes less a mystery and more a process. They log. They do arithmetic in the dim and then again in the light, because numbers behave better under the sky. When the first estimate lands, Amelia cautious, Tess practical, it sits between breath and speech. Hundreds of thousands if the silver is what it looks like and the coins are genuine and the rifles can be deactivated and cataloged. Nobody says a figure. Saying the number would be like saying a newborn's name before the parents have. The real climax doesn't arrive with money. It arrives with a key. Taped to the underside of the workbench, crusted into disappearance, is a small iron key looped with string. Tess's torch finds it first, a wink in the timber. It fits the lock on a narrow steel cabinet that none of them have noticed because it is the color of ordinary. Inside, more oilcloth, and under that, a ledger embossed with the letter S. Jim opens it and sees columns and neat sums, but no dates. Only names. Sullivan. Then in a different hand, Jim. He forgets to breathe. Amelia leans beside him, reads without taking the book. Could be a later edition, she says gently. Your father, perhaps. Or your grandfather going back to it. Jim touches the ink with a fingertip and pulls away as if it were fresh. He turns the page and finds a diagram. A rectangle with measurements, little notes about hinge grease, the words termite cover in capital letters. Deliberate, Tess says. They wanted the colony on it, warm, dry, self-repairing camo. They climb out to light with the ledger because words deserve sun. On the grass, Amelia shows Jim what hallmarks mean. Lion passant, date letters, a maker's cartouche. Grant, blinking against the heat haze, holds a coin between thumb and forefinger and laughs softly. Mate, this could retire your worries. Pasture Tom says nothing for a long time. We pray for rain and answer with dams, he says. We pray for provision and answer with cellars. Sounds right to me. Then the wind shifts. It turns warm to warmer, carries a smell of change. The electrified metal scent that comes before a storm that will not arrive. The lid creaks as the hinge cools. The hazard tape flutters. Jim realizes his hands are shaking. The moment crackles not with danger but with decision. He can put everything back and pretend he never lifted the first spoon. Or he can stay and call and sign and be seen. He chooses out loud so it will be harder to unchoose. We do this proper, he says. We honor it. He lifts the tea service and holds its weight like a baby, and places it gently on the blanket where Amelia is keeping the museum's future neat. He returns for the coins. He returns for the letters. He returns for a rifle that he doesn't want but cannot deny as part of the story. Each trip makes the whole less a secret and more a doorway. Papers multiply. Phones chirp. The constable arrives in a Hilux and shakes Jim's hand twice. He peers down the hatch and says, Crikey. and then writes things down in an earnest block he learned at the academy. Tess starts saying words like conserve and desiccate, and Pastor Tom volunteers cool storage in the church hall because concrete keeps a truer temperature. Amelia calls a contact in Brisbane who says a proper appraisal needs lab light and time, but that hallmarks and sovereigns aren't shy about their own identity. The last item to surface is not valuable to anyone who doesn't know the shape of worry. Jim finds it behind the steel cabinet, fallen, almost paper thin. A note torn from a ledger, folded to a thumbnail, grease soft at the edges. He opens it carefully. The handwriting could be his father's or Harry's or both through the accident of genetics. It says, "If this gets to you, fix the roof first, then the water, then the feed. After that, if there's any left, buy a piano because your mother wanted music in this house." Jim laughs once, aching and clean. The others laugh with him because permission is catching. He imagines a piano the color of honey in the lounge where the vinyl curls at the corners. Imagines notes making big rooms in small evenings. He imagines rain stepping across the tin, finding gutters that don't sag, tanks that don't leak. He imagines planting the east paddock and feeding it water without doing the mental math that turns hope into arithmetic. His chest feels like the first breath after a dive too long. "Time," Amelia says. "Let's log what we can and secure the rest." Work, the answer to panic. Climax is not an explosion here. It is a ledger balancing. It is a man naming what matters in the order he will do it. Roof, water, feed, music. As the sun leans west, they carry the last of the boxes to the ute, cover them with a tarp, and tie them with a faith older than knots. The lid waits, ajar, a yawning pupil. Jim looks down one more time. He touches the hinge with the back of his knuckles. "Thank you," he says, not to anyone in particular. And the paddock listens like country does, without comment, with attention. He lowers the lid, and the hinge, newly honest with grease, gives a singular, low answer, as if a door somewhere else, a long way off, just now opens. 2 weeks later, papers catch up to the day. The constable files an incident report that reads like a recipe for history. The museum tags the silver and the rifles with clean labels that make the past look tidy. Amelia drafts a short bulletin for the society. Container bunker uncovered on Sullivan property. Likely installed 1942 during coastal invasion fears. Contents include silver tea service, Victorian gold sovereigns, preserved correspondence, sporting rifles, and household stores. Tess sends Jim a photo of the termite cross-section she cut from the mound. A perfect honeycomb over steel, under a caption that says, proudly, "They knew what they were doing." An appraiser from Brisbane spends a morning with a loop and gloved hands. He speaks the language of weight and assay, clicks his tongue at hallmarks that bestow dates like blessings. In the evening, he stands on Jim's veranda while heat lifts off the yard in wavering panes and names a number that finds the exact hinge between breath and relief. $380,000. Jim repeats it without accent. 380. He feels the roof straighten, the gutters hold, the tanks regain their patience. News drifts farther than fences. A local reporter films a piece tight on Jim's hands, the camera honest about old scars and clean nails. He doesn't say pay the bank, fix the roof, fix the water, buy seed. He has learned the power of quiet lists. Make the place sound again, he says. And then, maybe music. The clip finds an audience. Strangers send videos of their grandparents' teapots ringing like bells. Someone in Cairns posts a photograph of a bundle wrapped in oilcloth with the caption, "Wonder what's under our hills." The bunker becomes a room in the house of his days. He oils the hinge until it stops complaining, lays a rubber lip across the rim to keep out frogs when storms finally come. He sets a small table beside the ladder with a guest book for the curious. A neat fiction that this is a museum, not a life. School kids choose their favorite object and draw it. The smallest cup, the tallest rifle, the coin that looks like the moon. Pastor Tom writes a blessing that Jim keeps under the lid, a sentence shapely enough to hold both thanks and instruction. At night, when wind lifts the grass and wraps it around fence posts, Jim stands at the edge of the repaired lid and thanks the ground in the way country people do, by noticing. The stars throw salt across the sky. By the tank, a frog clicks like an old clock. Somewhere, cattle breathe. He thinks of Harry cutting fence posts by moonlight, choosing the container, coordinating quiet hands and long nights, trusting termites to build a fortress of forgetfulness over the top. It changes the way he looks at the paddock. Where he once saw obstacles, he now sees covers. Where he once worried about what the land hides, he now wonders what it shelters. He plants barley in the east paddock with a slowness that is not delay but care. The drill's furrows look like lines on a palm. Rain arrives in a modest, obedient way, enough to make the ground smell like a memory of green. He hears Amelia's voice in his head when he checks the soil. History is just today with time on it. The ledger goes to the Historical Society. The letters are scanned and returned in a linen folder that rustles like a soft decision. Jim reads them at the table while the kettle chatters and the roof does not leak. He hears the everyday of older days, a broken gate, a Sunday roast, the stubborn lemon tree that finally flowers. He answers the only way you can answer people who wrote into your future, by doing the next right thing with your hands. The piano arrives last, a second-hand upright the color of honey. The removalists slide it into the lounge as if moving a sleeping animal. When he plays, he hears the lid's long groan as harmony, the boar pump's cough as percussion, the wedge-tailed eagles as a choir that refuses harmony for the sake of height. If you have watched this far, you know what this channel is for. It's for mornings when work asks you to turn a wall into a door. It's for the smell of hot dust and old paper, for the way a hand on a hinge can change a family. Subscribe if you haven't already. Tell us where you're watching from so we can hear your country and the stories you share. And if you want more of this, ordinary people meeting the extraordinary under their feet, click on the next story waiting in the corner of your screen. The paddock holds more rooms than anyone guesses. Let's open the next one together. Now.